All right, this next section is ancient Greece, and one of the reasons that we study ancient Greece is because of the influence it's had on Western civilization. So Greece is very, very complicated, and as long as you go through the readings carefully, most of the very important concepts are covered, and there's no way for me to, in just a short little lecture, cover everything. So I'm going to hit kind of call it the greatest hits of ancient Greece. Lots of things that I want you to know, but don't forget to be doing the readings at the same time. And the first and most obvious contribution to Western civilization is this idea of representative government. And when I say representative government, I mean a direct democracy where citizens participate directly in decision making. And there are many, many detours in the history of democracy between ancient Greece and today, and you see lots of weird requirements put on participating in democracy, property requirements, racial requirements. So sometimes the democracy is more harsh, sometimes it's more open, but if you boiled them all down to their basic elements, what you're really looking at is a system where the people themselves are participating. A really good example of this is the concept of ostracism. And ostracism, think of it like a popularity contest in reverse. And it's a little bit like the TV show Survivor, where if enough people vote for you, then you're kind of off the island and you have to leave. You're required to leave. But unlike the TV show, you can come back after a set time. So when somebody was ostracized, they would be gone for a time period of months or maybe years, but at some point they had the opportunity, or they would have the opportunity to come home. And the way this worked was there were little bits of pottery, little shards, broken pieces of pottery, and they would write the person's name on this, put them in these big baskets, and then you would take and count the pieces of pottery that had someone's name on it, and if you won the unpopularity contest, then you were ostracized. You can also see some of the problems with this system. Archaeologists have found thousands of these tiny little shards of pottery, and they've also found some that are clearly mass produced, like you see here. And the problem that this leads to is obvious voter fraud. So if you look at these pieces, you can tell someone is trying to get rid of somebody because it's the same handwriting over and over and over and over again. So even though this may not be a perfect system, democratic system, or it's certainly much different than we know it today, it's still an example of people participating, someone going to a location and then participating in the decision making, a political process. We've already talked a little bit about Persia, and Greece becomes the subject of attention for Persia during what are known as the Persian Wars. And you see the Persian king Darius there, he invades Greece. His idea is he's going to come around from the north side and he's going to conquer all of the Greek islands and add this to the Persian Empire. He is able to conquer and hold coastal Turkey, the same area that's noted as Anatolia on all the old maps. And when he begins to get into Greece itself, he runs into a series of really bad fights with the Greeks, and it shows a weakness in Persian military tactics. Now, I'm referring to Greece here, but don't think of it as a large unified country. Think of it's actually a series of city states where very powerful cities control the land around them. So Athens and Sparta and things like that. It's not a modern nation in any way, shape, or form. The Greeks are able to stop Darius, defend themselves, because they fight with different technology than the Persians. And they use something called the hoplite phalanx. And it's a military formation where these men stand behind shields with spears out, and it provides almost like a living, movable wall that the Persian army was not equipped to defeat in battle. In fact, the Persian advance into Greece is stopped absolutely in its tracks at the Battle of Marathon. This is about 490 BC. Don't worry about the date. And I put this slide up here to illustrate just how extremely violent this type of warfare in the ancient world was. And you can see here on the right-hand side the crushed helmet and the skull with the whole lower part of the skull slashed away underneath that helmet over there. And the photograph behind them is a giant mound. And this is a mound that covers the dead that were stacked up in a huge pile after the Battle of Marathon. And 10 years later, the successor of Darius, Xerxes, invades Greece himself. And he's got the exact same intention. He plans to add the Greek islands to the Persian Empire. And I've used a photograph from the movie 300 of a kind of fanciful, bizarre representation of Xerxes. And keep in mind that they've been making a lot of these movies about this subject fairly recently, say within the last 5 years maybe. And a lot of these um, films have got absolutely nothing to do with reality. This kind of bizarre homoerotic film that they made for the 300 being probably the worst example. But after the 10 years, when Xerxes comes back, he stands a much better chance of actually finishing the conquest. And part of the reason for this is that the situation between the Greeks themselves is not settled. So you've got extremely powerful city states like Athens on the left there and Sparta on the right there that are they have a different series of allies. They're not on very good terms. There's much infighting going on between the city states. And so therefore, when you have fighting amongst yourselves, you stand in a weakened position from an outside aggressor like the Persian army. And moving forward, we are going to use the city of Athens and the city of Sparta as the principal players in this. Keep in mind that it's not just Athens and Sparta. Sometimes the history, in an effort to condense this huge amount of information, just talks about Athens and Sparta, but each one of these cities also has allies that are fighting alongside it. Now, by far the most famous battle of the entire Persian Wars is the battle that takes place at Thermopylae, and that's what the movie The 300 is ostensibly portraying. And it is true that the 300 held up the entire Persian army for 3 days, and it cost the Persian army 7,000 troops to break through and continue the invasion. But the importance of this is not this very heroic story about King Leonidas and the Spartans. It's that this blocking maneuver in this pass at Thermopylae allows the other Greeks that are further in the line of advance of the Persians time to evacuate. And if you think about what I've already told you about the hoplite phalanx, you can see how powerful that military technology is if it is enough for that small amount of men to hold up the entire Persian army for that long. It's a very valuable technique. The photograph that is behind the statue, that's actually the memorial in Greece. The photograph that's behind that is the actual site where the battle was fought. And where that road is on the right-hand side is about where the ocean was in the ancient time. So there's been a lot of fill and erosion going on here, but it's still a very, very small location to be funneling a huge army through. And so you've got this perfect combination of the environment feeding back into powerful military technology, and that's really what allows the 300 to do what they did. Uh, this is not to downplay how brave they were or how much they believed in their cause or what have you, but there's more factors at work here than just heroism. And Persia does manage to get all the way to Athens, but when they get there, Athens is evacuated. So the Persians, in a fit of anger, burned the city to the ground. The problem here is not that Athens is destroyed, although it surely must have been demoralizing from a certain standpoint. But the problem for Persia is because the Battle of Thermopylae served as a blocking maneuver, Athens and the troops there lived to fight another day. And sometimes it's better to preserve your soldiers and your ability to make war than to decide everything all in one moment on the battlefield. And this shows up in reality almost immediately. An Athenian fleet catches the Persians at the Battle of Salamis and destroys the entire Persian fleet. Again, this would not have been possible if they had not, ran away when the Persians were advancing on Athens. But you sometimes you back away and then regroup to counterattack. And the following year, a combined Greek army, now we're talking unified Greek troops from all over the place, meet at a place called Plataea, and they absolutely squash the Persian army. And they deal such a blow to the Persian army at the Battle of Plataea that Persia never recovers. They certainly never recover the offensive, and it really begins the slow downward spiral of the Persian Empire. What often happens in wars, especially when you have a power vacuum or disrupted political entities, is the victors tend to consolidate power as quickly as possible. And this is exactly what happens after the Persian Wars. So the fact that the Greeks are able to repulse Persia, it leaves Athens in a very powerful position, and it also makes Sparta very powerful uh, in each other's eyes, but also because of the influence they hold over their allies. And Persia becomes kind of a non-factor. They're kind of receding to the sidelines. And the great irony is that Athens and Sparta and their allies kind of turn on each other. Athens, after the Persian Wars, forms what's called the Delian League. And they, of course, sit themselves at the head of this league with 200 plus or minus city-states as members. And Athens begins to use this influence and power to control others, to control other areas in Greece, and to influence trade policies and politics. And they would reach out and attack people that did not comply with what they thought they should be doing. And for Sparta, this is politically unacceptable, and kind of enough is enough. And in 431, they declare war. The great tragedy of the Peloponnesian Wars is that Sparta and Athens are militarily quite matched, well matched. Athens tends to be a much more powerful naval force, but Sparta is a tremendous infantry force. And because they're so matched in different areas, not one is not able to decisively overcome the other one. And so the war kind of just grinds on and on and on, year after year after year. And we have actually we have very clear records of the Peloponnesian War written by Thucydides, and he is one of the men that is responsible for the foundation, at least the intellectual foundation of the discipline of history itself. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. These wars in the Peloponnesian Peninsula, which would be what is modern day Greece, continue on until the attack of Sicily, and you can see the island of Sicily on the bottom left there. Athens and some of her allies attack Sicily, and Sicily is an ally of Sparta. And in the battle on Sicily, 20,000 troops from Athens are wiped out. And this final moment tipped the war in Sparta's favor. Now, Athens held out for 9 more years, but they were decisively defeated, finally decisively defeated by Sparta in 404 BC. Don't worry about the date. And this war has, of course, killed tens of thousands of people. It's been extremely rough on the countryside, and it's interesting because the result of the Peloponnesian War is people start to ask questions about the world around them. And what you find is this flirtation with all manner of new types of philosophies. People begin to think about the idea of universal laws and their place in the universe, how order is maintained in the universe, and how would you understand the universe in terms of in human terms. What method do you use? Logic and reason? Do you look for the truth? And as the uh, for the fallout of a terrible war, these are great intellectual products. Now, the two biggest names associated with this tradition of flourishing of philosophy are Plato and Aristotle, and they're certainly linked. Plato founded a school called the Academy, and he taught using what's called the Socratic method. And in the Socratic method, you ask someone questions that would, as the student or as the person you're asking the questions, answers the question and thinks through the question, they get there, they arrive at their own answer. Plato viewed society as three parts. There would be farmers, soldiers, and rulers, and he believed that the smartest person should be the one that is king. Aristotle also founded a school called the Lyceum, and he believed that in order to find knowledge, um, you needed to apply rules of logic and reason. And you should be skeptical of things. You shouldn't really trust everything you see. Um, but the ideas thought up by Plato and Aristotle and put into practice in their schools, the Academy and the Lyceum, these are wildly influential for thousands of years, right on to the very present day. And this is also truly the beginning of history as a distinct intellectual discipline. And these two men, Herodotus, I've misspelled his name, the T and the D are transposed, and Thucydides come up with the basic principles of history that we use to write history and do historical research right this very minute. Herodotus wrote about the Persian Wars, and in his writing, he was attempting to record accurately a record of the events. And this was a new thing because prior to this, everything was just kind of a list of things done by the gods. If you read the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, these things that are happening all around humans are being involved with are the reasons and causes are transposed to something um, spiritual. And Herodotus is more interested in the events and the human players and producing this accurate record. Also, something that historians strive to do as well. Thucydides brought a systematic approach to writing history, and he's trying to find the best records of something to inform him about what he's writing on. And those principles are still in practice today. If you were writing a research paper on, I don't know, pick any subject you would like, um, and you had two different sources, you had a book that was written by someone with a PhD and 25 years of experience and research in the field versus something that was on Wikipedia, you can clearly see which of the records is the best one that you should turn to for the information you need.